There is a river in the mountains of northern Greece that the ancients believed no man could cross the same way twice. Not because the crossing changed, because the river did. Every second new water, every second a different river wearing the same name. A man once stood at its bank, furious. He had come to cross where he always crossed, at the hour he always crossed, and the water was higher than yesterday, colder than he expected, faster than his plan allowed. So he did what most of us do when life refuses to match our expectations. He fought it. He pushed against the current with his whole body, cursing the river for not staying still, for not being the river of yesterday. He drowned 3 feet from the shore he was trying to reach. A second man arrived an hour later. Same river, same current, same cold. But he did something strange. He stopped resisting the water's direction and let it carry him diagonally, downstream toward a bend in the bank he hadn't originally planned to reach. He didn't fight the river's nature. He worked with it. He crossed in 4 minutes without a single wasted motion. Same river, same danger. 2 completely different outcomes. And the only variable that changed was this. One man tried to force reality to bend to his will, and the other man learned to move with the current beneath him. This is not just a story about a river. This is the story of your life right now. Somewhere in your world today, there is a current you are fighting. A job that isn't what you planned. A relationship that changed shape without asking your permission. A body that is aging on its own schedule. A plan that fell apart despite your effort, your prayers, your late nights, your sacrifice. And the ancient Stoics, men who buried children, lost fortunes, were exiled from their homes, and still built some of the calmest, most powerful minds in human history, discovered something almost 2,000 years ago that modern psychology is only now catching up to. The suffering was never really about the river. It was about the fighting. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your resistance is costing you more than the difficulty itself ever could, and you will walk away with a completely different relationship to the parts of your life you cannot control. Stay with me, because the third story I'm going to tell you today might be the most important 12 minutes you spend on yourself this year. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient wisdom for the modern mind. If this is your first time here, this channel exists for one reason. We take the philosophy that helped emperors rule empires, that helped slaves find freedom in their own minds, and that helped ordinary people survive plagues, wars, exile, and loss, and we translate it into something you can actually use on a Tuesday morning when your inbox is full and your patience is thin. We study Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who wrote his private journal not for an audience of millions, but simply to remind himself how to be a good man in a hard world. We study Epictetus, who was born a slave, crippled by a master's cruelty, and still became one of the most influential teachers of freedom the world has ever known. We study Seneca, statesman and playwright, a man who counseled Rome's most dangerous emperor by day and reflected on mortality and meaning by candlelight. These were not men who lived easy lives in ivory towers. They lived through betrayal, exile, financial ruin, and death, and they built a framework of thinking that let them remain steady, while the world around them was not. If you're new here, consider subscribing, because every week we take one piece of that ancient wisdom and turn it into something practical for the life you're actually living right now. And if you've been here before, welcome home. Let's get into today's lesson, because what you're about to hear may quietly change the way you handle every hard day for the rest of your life. The anatomy of fighting life. Let's start with an honest question, and I want you to actually answer it in your own mind before you keep watching. What are you currently fighting? Not fighting with your fists, fighting with your mind. What situation right now are you mentally wrestling against, wishing it were different, replaying, resenting, resisting? Maybe it's a diagnosis. Maybe it's a breakup you didn't choose. Maybe it's a career that stalled when you thought by now you'd be further along. Maybe it's simply the fact that today didn't go the way you needed it to. Here's what the Stoics understood 2,000 years before modern psychology. gave it clinical names. There are two separate layers to every difficulty you face. The first layer is the event itself, the diagnosis, the breakup, the delay, the disappointment. The second layer, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, is the mental war you wage against the event happening at all. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man alive in his era, wrote something in his private journal that should stop you in your tracks. He said that the obstacle in the path becomes the path. Not ignore the obstacle, not pretend. The obstacle isn't there. The obstacle itself becomes the way forward. Once you stop treating its existence as a personal insult. Most of us don't do this. Most of us treat difficulty as if it's a mistake in the universe's paperwork, as if pain, delay, loss, and disappointment are clerical errors that should never have been assigned to our file. And so when they arrive anyway, we don't just experience the difficulty, we experience the difficulty plus our own outrage that it dared to show up. Think about the last time you were stuck in traffic and truly late for something important. The traffic itself cost you what, 15 minutes? But how much of that 15 minutes did you spend calm, thinking clearly, planning your next move? And how much of it did you spend gripping the steering wheel, replaying every reason this shouldn't be happening, mentally rehearsing arguments with a system that could not hear you? The traffic was 15 minutes. Your suffering may have lasted the whole day. This is the first truth we need to sit with before we go any further. Fighting reality doesn't change reality. It only adds a second layer of pain on top of the first. And the second layer, the resistance, is almost always the heavier one. I want to introduce you to someone. I'll call her Elena. Her story isn't unusual, which is exactly why it matters. Story 1. Elena and the diagnosis she didn't choose. Elena was 34 when the letter came. Not a phone call, a letter, cold and clinical, confirming what a specialist had suspected for months. An autoimmune condition, chronic, manageable, but never fully gone. The kind of diagnosis that doesn't end your life, but rewrites the terms of it permanently. For the first year, Elena fought. Not the illness itself. You cannot out-argue a body's biology, but everything around it. She fought the idea that this was happening to her specifically, as if the universe had made some kind of targeting error. She fought the doctor's advice when it didn't match the life she had already planned. She fought her own fatigue, pushing through days she should have rested, then paying for it in flare-ups that cost her weeks. She fought the calendar, refusing to adjust her ambitions, her workload, her expectations of herself, because adjusting them felt like losing. Every single day became two battles: the illness itself, which she genuinely could not control, and her war against the fact that the illness existed at all, which she could control and which she chose every morning to keep fighting. She told me, she told a friend, who later became a mutual friend of mine, this story, that the turning point came not from a doctor, but from an old, worn paperback of meditations that had been sitting on her father's bookshelf for 20 years. She picked it up on a night she couldn't sleep, more out of desperation than curiosity. And she found this line, one that Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to an audience, in the middle of a military campaign while he was likely exhausted, ill himself and grieving losses of his own, that a person's wrongdoing or a difficult circumstance doesn't actually harm your mind unless your mind decides it is harmed. Eleanor read that line probably a dozen times, because what it was suggesting was almost offensive at first. Was he saying her diagnosis wasn't real? No, he was saying something far more precise. The diagnosis was real. The pain was real. The limitations were real. But the added suffering, the rage, the sense of injustice, the exhausting daily war against a fact that could not be changed, that part was optional. That part was a second river she was choosing to fight, layered right on top of the first one she had no choice about. She didn't become a different person overnight. Nobody does. But she started asking herself one question every time she felt the old resistance rising. Is this something I can change? Or is this something I need to move with? If it was something she could change, which foods triggered flare-ups, which specialists to trust, how to structure her week. She acted decisively with full effort. That's not passivity. That's wisdom applied correctly. But if it was something she couldn't change, the existence of the condition itself, the fact that her body now had different rules than it used to, she stopped, spending her limited energy at war with it. She started asking a completely different question. Given that this is now true, how do I move well within it? 2 years later, Eleanor is not cured. The Stoics never promised a world without hardship. They were far too honest for that kind of comfort. But she describes her life now as lighter, not because the illness got easier, but because she stopped adding a second illness on top of it, the illness of resistance. I tell you Elena's story first because I want you to notice something important before we go further. Flowing with life is not the same as giving up. It's not resignation. It's not weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most demanding disciplines a human mind can practice, because fighting is instinctive and flowing is trained. If any part of Elena's story felt uncomfortably familiar to you, if there's a diagnosis, a limitation, a hard truth in your own life you've been at war with, I want you to type one word in the comments right now: river. Just that. It helps me understand how many of you are carrying something like this today, and it helps this message reach someone else who needs to hear it. We'll come back to why that small act of naming it actually matters later in this video, why your mind is wired to fight. Before we go further into how to flow, we need to understand why fighting feels so natural in the first place. Because if you don't understand the mechanism, you'll keep falling back into it no matter how many quotes you memorize. Your nervous system was not built for a world of emails, diagnoses, breakups, and long-term financial plans. It was built over hundreds of thousands of years for a much simpler and much more dangerous world, one where a rustle in the grass might be the wind, or might be a predator about to end your life in the next 4 seconds. In that world, resistance was survival. If a lion charged, your ancestors didn't calmly accept the situation and flow with the current. They fought or they ran immediately with every resource their body had. The amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, exists specifically to override slow, deliberate thinking in moments of danger and force, instant reaction. The problem, and this is the core insight that makes Stoic philosophy so strangely modern, is that this ancient alarm system cannot tell the difference between a lion and a difficult email. It cannot tell the difference between a genuine physical threat and an uncomfortable truth about your career, your relationship, or your health. To your nervous system, resistance feels like safety. Fighting feels like control. Even when there is nothing to fight and nothing to control, your body still reaches for the same ancient weapon: tension, adrenaline, the clenched jaw, the racing thoughts, the urge to push back against something that cannot be pushed. Epictetus, teaching students in Rome nearly 2,000 years ago, identified this exact mechanism without any of our modern neuroscience. He taught that people are disturbed not by events, but by their judgments about events. What he meant was this: the event triggers the ancient alarm, but it is your mind's interpretation. This shouldn't be happening. This is unfair. I cannot handle this. That turns a simple biological alarm into hours, days, or years of suffering. Here's the part that changes everything, though. Epictetus didn't just diagnose the problem. He handed us the tool to work with it, and it's called the dichotomy of control, and it might be the single most practical idea in the entire Stoic tradition. He divided everything in existence into 2 categories. In the first category, things within our control. Our judgments, our efforts, our desires, our responses, our character. In the second category, everything else. Other people's opinions, the weather, the actions of others, our reputation, our health outcomes, the past, and most of the future. And here is his radical claim: the only sane place to invest your energy, your worry, your fighting spirit, is category 1, Anything you pour into category 2 is, by definition, energy wasted on something that was never going to move, no matter how hard you pushed. Think back to the river. The current's direction, its speed, its temperature, none of that was in the first man's control. His only real choice was how he moved his own body in response to it. The moment he tried to control the river itself, he was already fighting a battle he could not win. This is the mechanism behind almost every unnecessary suffering in modern life. We fight our boss's opinion of us, category 2. We fight a partner's decision to leave, category 2. We fight the fact that we're aging, category 2. We fight a global economy, a pandemic, a diagnosis, another person's choices, all category 2, all completely outside our hands, and yet we spend the majority of our emotional energy exactly there. Meanwhile, category 1, our own effort, our own judgment, our own next action, often sits almost entirely neglected, because it doesn't feel as urgent as the fight. Fighting feels like doing something. Flowing feels, at first, like doing nothing at all. But that feeling is a lie your ancient nervous system is telling you. Flowing is not passivity. Flowing is precision, pouring 100% of your finite energy into the 10% of your circumstances you can actually influence, and releasing your grip on the 90% you cannot. Story number 2, James and the marriage that ended without his permission. I want to tell you about James now, because his story shows what happens when a person applies this dichotomy, imperfectly at first, and how the correction unfolds. James was 41 when his wife told him she wanted a divorce. 19 years of marriage, 2 children, a house they built together, quite literally, hanging drywall on weekends when they were young and broke and in love. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, she told him it was over, and no explanation he could construct, no promise he could make, no negotiation he could offer, was going to change her decision. For months, James fought. Not loudly, not in dramatic scenes, but internally, constantly. He replayed conversations, searching for the sentence that could have been different. He built arguments in the shower for why she was wrong. He tried more than once to convince her to reconsider, treating her decision as a problem to be solved rather than a fact to be accepted. He was, in Stoic terms, spending every ounce of his energy in category 2, a decision that belonged entirely to another human being, over which he had no real control at all. The cost wasn't just emotional, it was physical. He wasn't sleeping. He lost weight he didn't need to lose. He was short with his children during the exact months they needed his steadiness the most. He was, in every sense, drowning 3 feet from shore, fighting a current that had already made its decision, refusing to let it carry him anywhere new. The shift for James didn't come from a book at first. It came from his own son, 11 years old at the time, who asked him one evening why he seemed so far away even, when he was sitting right there in the room. That single, simple question, from a child cut through months of internal noise in a way that no self-help article ever had. James later found his way to Seneca, specifically to a set of letters Seneca wrote to a grieving friend named Marcia, whose son had died years earlier and who was still, according to Seneca, drowning in a grief she refused to let move through her. Seneca's message to Marcia was not stop feeling pain. It was something more precise and honestly more compassionate. He told her that excessive grief that refuses to acknowledge what has actually happened and instead keeps arguing with the past, becomes a second wound layered on top of the first, self-inflicted and entirely within her power to release, even while the original loss remained permanently, appropriately painful. James began to separate the 2 rivers in his own life. The first river, the marriage, had ended. That was fact, permanent, painful, entirely outside his control, no matter how much he wished otherwise. The second river, his ongoing internal war against that fact, his refusal to let it be true, his hours spent constructing arguments for a reality that no longer existed. That second river, unlike the first, was entirely his to redirect. He didn't do this by suppressing his grief. That's a common and important misunderstanding. of Stoicism that we need to address directly right here because it matters. Stoicism does not ask you to feel nothing. Even Marcus Aurelius wept. Even Seneca acknowledged the wisdom of tears in their proper measure. What Stoicism asks is that you stop adding unnecessary suffering to necessary pain, that you let the grief that belongs to the situation move through you without manufacturing an entirely separate war against the fact of the situation itself. Within a year, James described something that surprised even him. He wasn't happy the marriage ended. He would tell you honestly, even now, that he wishes it hadn't. But he had stopped drowning. He had redirected his energy toward what remained in his control. How he showed up for his children, how he rebuilt his own daily structure, how he chose to interpret this new chapter rather than treating it as a life sentence. He crossed the river, not because the current became gentler, because he finally stopped fighting its direction and let it carry him toward a shore he hadn't originally planned to reach, but which turned out to be solid ground all the same. If you've ever fought a decision that wasn't yours to make, a partner's choice, a company's layoff, a friend's silence, take a moment right now and consider subscribing to this channel, because we go deeper into exactly this kind of practical philosophy every single week. And this is precisely the kind of thinking that helps in the moment's life, doesn't ask your permission before changing. The difference between flowing and giving up. I want to pause here and address the objection that's probably forming in some of your minds right now, because it's a fair one, and the Stoics themselves took it seriously. Doesn't flowing with life just mean giving up? Doesn't accepting what you cannot control eventually bleed into accepting things you actually could have changed if you'd fought harder? This is the single most important distinction in this entire video. So let's be precise about it. Flowing with life is not passivity. It is not surrender in the sense of quitting. It is surrender in a completely different sense. The surrender of energy, wasted on the unchangeable, redirected entirely toward the changeable. The river metaphor holds up beautifully here if you follow it closely. The skilled swimmer, who lets the current carry him diagonally, is not floating, limp and lifeless downstream. He is working hard with every muscle in his body, but he is working with the water's actual direction instead of against it. He reaches the shore faster and with far less injury than the man who tried to swim straight across a current that had other plans. Marcus Aurelius did not flow with life by retreating from his duties as emperor. He led military campaigns. He governed an empire through plague and war. He worked relentlessly at the things within his control, his discipline, his judgment, his character, his next decision. What he refused to do was waste his limited energy raging against the plague itself, against the betrayals of men he had trusted, against the simple fact that ruling an empire in crisis is exhausting and often thankless. He poured his fight into Category 1 and released his grip on Category 2. This is the crucial reframe. Flowing with life means fighting with total intensity for what you can influence and releasing total resistance toward what you cannot. It's not less effort. In many ways, it's more effort, because it requires you to constantly, honestly sort your circumstances into the correct category, which takes more discipline than simply reacting to everything with the same blind resistance. Let's make this concrete, because abstract philosophy is worthless if it doesn't change what you do on a Wednesday afternoon. If you lose your job, flowing with life doesn't mean passively accepting poverty. It means accepting the fact of the job loss, because arguing with an event that has already happened is a battle you cannot win, and then pouring everything you have into what remains in your control. Your next application, your skills, your network, your daily discipline in the job search, the energy you would have spent raging at your former employer, replaying the meeting where you got the news, constructing arguments for a decision that's already final. All of that energy gets redirected into forward motion. If your health takes an unexpected turn, flowing with life doesn't mean refusing treatment or ignoring medical advice. It means accepting the diagnosis as fact, rather than treating its existence as a personal betrayal by the universe, and then applying total effort toward what remains within your control, your treatment plan, your daily habits, your mindset, your quality of life within the new terms you've been given. Notice the pattern. In every case, flowing requires two simultaneous actions: complete acceptance of what has already happened or what genuinely cannot be changed, paired with complete effort toward what remains actionable. Acceptance without effort is passivity. Effort without acceptance is exhausting, fruitless resistance. But the two together, that is the entire art of Stoic living, and it is the exact skill that separated the man who drowned from the man who crossed the river. The philosophy of amor fati, loving your fate. There's a phrase that emerged from Stoic thinking, most famously in the writings of Marcus Aurelius, though the Latin phrasing itself was later popularized by other philosophers who drew from this same well: amor fati, love of fate. Not tolerance of fate, not begrudging acceptance of fate. Love. This is where Stoicism stops being merely a coping mechanism and becomes something far more radical, complete inversion of how most people relate to hardship. The default human posture toward difficulty is to wish it away, to treat every obstacle as an unwelcome intruder in a life that should otherwise be smooth. Amor fati asks something almost unthinkable by comparison. What if you didn't just tolerate the obstacle, but actively recognized it as necessary material for the person you're becoming? Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. Read that slowly. He's not saying obstacles are secretly good in some sentimental, silver lining sense. He's saying something more structurally precise, that the obstacle itself is not separate from your path. It is the actual material your path is made of. There is no path around difficulty toward a well-lived life. The difficulty, engaged with correctly, is the path. Think about anyone you deeply admire for their strength of character. I'd wager that admiration wasn't built by watching them enjoy an easy life. It was built by watching how they moved through a hard one. The river doesn't just test you, in a very real sense. It builds the exact muscles you need for the next, larger river ahead. Fight it uselessly and you drown before you ever develop that strength. Flow with it, engage with it, work with its current, and you emerge on the other side measurably, stronger than the person who stepped into the water. This reframes the entire question we started with. It's not just, how do I stop suffering from what I cannot control? It becomes something bigger. How do I actively use what I cannot control as the raw material for who I'm building myself to be? Story number 3, Marco and the business that collapsed in a single week. I promised you a third story, and I said it might be the most important 12 minutes you spend on yourself this year. Here it is. Marco spent 6 years building a small manufacturing business from nothing. No inheritance, no investors, just relentless work, careful reinvestment, and a genuine pride in the fact that he had built something real with his own hands and mind. At its peak, the business employed 14 people and supported his family comfortably for the first time in his life. Then, over the course of a single terrible week, a combination of a key client's sudden bankruptcy, a supply chain disruption nobody could have predicted, and a cash flow gap that had been quietly building for months, collapsed the entire operation. 6 years of work, gone in 7 days. Marco's first instinct, and I want you to notice how universally human this instinct is, because it's probably your instinct too, was total consuming resistance. He spent the first month barely sleeping, running endless scenarios of what he could have done differently, constructing an alternate timeline in his mind where the client hadn't gone bankrupt, where he'd seen the warning signs earlier, where a different decision at some branching point 6 months earlier would have saved everything. He fought the collapse itself, as though enough mental effort applied retroactively could somehow unmake an event that had already irreversibly happened. This is one of the cruelest tricks the mind plays on us, and it's worth naming directly. We often fight hardest against events that are already finished, as if replaying them enough times might somehow give us a different outcome. It never does. The business was gone whether Marco accepted that fact or not. The only variable his resistance actually controlled was how much additional suffering he piled on top of an outcome that had already been decided by events outside his power. The turning point for Marco came from an unlikely source: a conversation with an older mentor, a man who had rebuilt 3 separate businesses across 4 decades, who told him something that initially sounded almost cold, but which Marco later understood as the kindest thing anyone said to him that year. The mentor told him, "The business is dead. Grieve it properly because it deserves that." But the moment you're grieving the business and start fighting the fact of its death, you're no longer honoring what you built. You're wasting the man who built it. That distinction, grieving the loss versus fighting the fact of the loss, became the hinge point of Marco's recovery. He allowed himself real grief. He didn't suppress it, didn't perform toughness he didn't feel, but he stopped fighting the unchangeable fact that the business, in its old form, was finished. And the moment that fight ended, an enormous amount of energy that had been consumed by resistance became available for something else entirely. Within 8 months, working with a fraction of his original resources but with a completely different relationship to hardship itself, Marco had started something new, smaller, leaner, built on lessons the collapse had taught him that success never could have. He describes the new venture 2 years later as more resilient than the original ever was, precisely because it was built by a version of himself that had learned to work with a current rather than drown fighting it. Here is the line Marco says changed him more than any other, one he found appropriately in Marcus Aurelius, that the things that happen to us are not good or bad in themselves. It is entirely how we use them that determines whether they build us or break us. The collapse of the business was not, in itself, a gift. It was a genuine loss, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But Marco's relationship to that loss, fight it forever, or grieve it honestly and then flow with what remained possible, determined everything about the years that followed. 3 stories: Elena's body, James's marriage, Marco's business. 3 completely different circumstances, and yet the exact same underlying mechanism at work in every single one. The event itself was painful, real, and in every case, entirely outside their control. But in every case, the deepest and most prolonged suffering came not from the event, but from the war waged against its existence. And in every case, the turning point arrived, the moment they redirected that same fighting energy away from an unchangeable past and toward an actionable present. If you've made it this far in the video, I want to ask you something honestly. Which of these 3 stories hit closest to home for you? Was it Elena's body, James's relationship, or Marco's collapse? Tell me in the comments, not because I need the engagement, but because I read every single one of these, and knowing which story resonates helps me understand what this community is actually carrying, so future videos can meet you exactly where you are. The practical tools, how to actually flow. Understanding the philosophy is one thing, living it on an ordinary Tuesday when your patience is already thin is another. So let's get specific. Here are the actual tools the Stoics left us. Not vague encouragement, but concrete practices you can start using today. The first tool is the morning reservation, or in Latin, the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Every morning before the day's difficulties arrive, the Stoics practiced briefly imagining what might go wrong, not to create anxiety, but to remove the shock. Marcus Aurelius began entire journal entries reminding himself that today he might encounter the meddling, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the treacherous,